Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video on YouTube Live. Thank you for watching. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, anyone interested in surviving as a Pilates instructor, and anyone interested in using core new tension in their own movement or in movement that they teach other people that has nothing to do with Pilates. So, rarely there comes a time to broadcast where I don't have much to say. And this is one of those. And so instead of just not broadcasting, just like working out, doing the reformer routine I do, sometimes I do it better and more focused than others. And here I am broadcasting without titles, meaning without subject to talk about. And so maybe I just be on my way, but before I go, we'll take one trip around the carousel of how you would go about explaining Michael Miller Pilates to someone, and then maybe we'll talk about core new tension. It's important to know that those are two separate things, meaning that MMP is a way of looking at Pilates, and core new tension is biodynamics that applies to everybody, no matter, it applies to everybody, period. So the carousel on MMP, it starts with Joseph Pilates, what comes to my mind right off the bat, and everyone that I ever met that knew him never left out with significant emphasis the description of Joe as a survivor. And so that sets up Joe's method as survival training, and the jungle that we're trying to survive in is gravity. I've often said gravity never surrenders, and that's why the conditioning that you do, refer to yesterday and the day before about conditioning, matters so much to be in a state of readiness for what comes up. Now, MMP professes that there's a ideal within Joe's original work, and that ideal can be grasped from just three things in his book: Return to Life Through Contrology. That's his definition, his promise, and his sequence. His definition is, contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Very next paragraph, he says that contrology develops the body uniformly, and then his book has the sequence of exercises that are meant to be performed in flow in that sequence as a choreographed effort. Okay. So the definition, contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Sets you up for talking about human capacities, and that I believe Joe's reference to spirit is what in modern terms we talk about as the observer in physics. Your complete concentration on the purpose of the exercise requires your presence in the moment, requires to be observing what's going on, and to that extent, observing with your eyes is like listening. It's observing, it's taking in sensational data to help you achieve the definition of complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. The body, the thinking, and the listening. And that this is a key part of MMP, is that spirit isn't spiritual. It isn't an interpretation of what it all means. Spirit in the moment is presence in the moment. It is the observer, the concentrator, the listener. And without that necessity as far as accomplishing the movement, you're not talking about Pilates. You're not talking about Pilates. And see, otherwise, if you're not fully concentrated on the purpose of the exercise, I'm reading Joe's words, otherwise there would be no valid reason for your interest in contrology. So, you can define Pilates out of the principles that are mentioned in this book, written years after Joe passed away. And those principles I always list in an order because order matters, especially in Pilates, because the choreography is so structured sequentially. And so you have to look at the principles if you're going to just look at those, and consider control being the most important, because that's what Joe called his method, contrology. And that in his writing, he says the most important thing is concentration, right? You concentrate on the purpose of the exercises, and that you come out from your center. You establish control at your center, your core, the grip at the hips, and that to get control, you have to concentrate on coming from your center and out from that center with precise, flowing movements that ride within the breath. So those are the principles that Freeman and Eisen's book talks about, and that the world eagerly clings to as a way of looking at Pilates, because it just refers to general principles, and it's up to you as to how you make up in a fricassee whatever those principles, whatever of those principles you want to focus on. So looking at Pilates from just the principles places all the emphasis and freedom on the instructor to do whatever they want and to make up whatever they want, and associate it to Pilates because of principles that Freeman and Eisen wrote about long after he died. And Joe's actual book says more than principles. It has the definition, the promise, and the sequence. The promise, is what? We're going around the merry-go-round, right? You've heard this all before, but you have to own it all and be able to expand on any part of it if you're going to be a Pilates teacher, meaning you're thinking and teaching and explaining what MMP is. And so that's why the word spirit in the definition in MMP holds specific meaning, and that within that meaning, as an instructor, you can aim for having the capacity of spirit in the human being, in your student or your group or your class or your training program. Have an understanding that spirit is a capacity in the human being, and that to get to the experience of contrology, you have to have complete coordination of three capacities. It is not about being spiritual at all. It's about the fact that there is such a thing as observation, and that observation influences the reality in which it happens, and that totally concentrated is all about listening and being connected to your sensation. And so I move on to the second thing of contrology produces a uniformly developed body. Right in that quote, you get the promise. I use the wedding ring as an indication of promise because it's pretty universally recognized that marriage and being married is a promise. And the promise that Joe makes is that confrology produces a uniformly developed body. And so, from what Joe writes and from the whole culture of Pilates that goes back to the roots of Joe, you have an understanding, or at least an impression, that whole body is important, that it's a whole body effort. And that whole body effort is mandatory to get to uniform development. I think it's mandatory because there's no way you work on all the pieces and the parts separately and end up with a uniformly engaged body. There's no way you work with each instrument in an orchestra separately and get to what you're after in an orchestral performance, orchestral performance, because all of it has to work together as the body does. And so uniform engagement is necessary for uniform development, and that's where we introduce the revolutionary, transcendent, not transcendent, just new, in the sense that oppositional rotation between axes isn't explicitly addressed anywhere in the world of science, in biomechanics, in body work. This is my profession, and maybe it's a profession that's meaningless, but it's captured my interest and my passion for a long time. And if you're on the carousel explaining MMP, you know, you almost have to talk about core new tension, because truly that's the means to arrive at uniform engagement. When your muscularity seeks to engage itself in oppositional rotation between axes, and to do that between all the endpoints in the body, from metatarsals to ankles to knees to hips to shoulders to ears, that's a capacity in the human being to engage itself, all of it, muscles, bones, fascia, tendons, blood, skin, everything, organs. It's the means through which the body engages itself to accomplish the movement it wants through space, either to run away from the dinosaur to survive in the jungle, or to dance and leap through space as though you can fly. So in this broadcast, it's such an easy thing to focus on, or at least to realize I'm on the carousel with you, explaining MMP and core new tension, and that the second thing that the ideal within Joe's work relies on is the promise of uniform development, which takes you as an instructor knowing you're walking into somebody's house, their body, flipping on all the lights. And you want all the lights to be on as evenly as possible, so no one group, no one muscle, or group of muscles has to bear more load, meaning bear more weight of the body, than it would if all of the muscles were evenly participating in. So uniform usage to get uniform development, and really in MMP and core new tension, the way you get uniform engagement is through creating tension between endpoints. Now, what's an endpoint, right? An endpoint, here's a bar, and here's a bar, and those are lines, those are axes, right? They're lines. When you can only see the end of the bar, That's the end point of the axis, right? So here are endpoints in the body, an endpoint at the ears, an axis at the ears that you can rotate around, an axis at the shoulders that you can rotate around. Now I'm still trying to stay on the carousel with MMP, and I want to see what else I left out. MMP considers the target that we're trying to hit, as an experience. That experience being what? You know this, we just said it. Complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, because that's Joe's definition of his method. And I think all too often Pilates is taken from an intellectual perspective and held at a distance, and always looked at as, yes, you do this stuff, and someday you'll actually know what you're talking about. Someday you'll be able to do this work, but right now it's way too hard for you. Someday it'll make sense to you. Someday you'll be worthy of the effort that you're putting in now. Someday you'll see a result from all that you're doing. And see, I just think that someday never gets here, and that truly the Pilates instructor that I try to be is to make someday happen now, right now, in the moment. And so to get that, to get the experience that you're after, you have to press the flow. Meaning you have to go fast enough through the exercises that you can't just sit back in your mind and think about what you're doing. You have to pay attention in your mind to what you're doing in order to do it, and in order to do it as well as you can. Because in MMP, that looks at Pilates as an ideal and concentrating on performing the exercises, I concentrate on performing it ideally. There's an ideal expression to each of the exercises and to the flow that you go through. And to the extent that you focus on moving ideally, it totally absorbs your mind because you're thinking about the ideal, and it totally allows for the opportunity for your observer, listener, right, concentrator to be connected to your experience, to be present in the moment, which is necessary for experiencing the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. All right, so I think I'm running out. So we talked about the three things that make up MMP's view of Pilates. We talked about how important spirit is as the concentrator and how necessary it is to be present in the moment, reaching for performance of the exercise, the purpose of the exercise, that's Joe's word, purpose. And secondarily, or the second thing was about what? The promise, and how the promise is uniform development, which requires uniform usage, which takes you to core new tension to get to that uniform usage. And then the third thing, the sequence of the exercises, right, all comes to those three things are the basis for what I offer up as the definition of the ideal. There's Joe's definition of his method. Contrology is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. And then there's MMP's definition of the ideal, and you can say this, right, with confidence and know how to expand on every piece of the definition. But the definition itself is uniform eccentric loading, flowing through progressive patterns of movement. right? So uniform, we know, let's talk about the words in the definition. Uniform, we know, is important because you need uniform usage to get uniform development. So how could you possibly not have the aspect of uniform be left out of the ideal? You can't. Now, eccentric, I use this as a way of saying eccentric, out from the center. If my knuckles are the center, then moving out away from that center is eccentric. Joe writes about it in his book, making a powerhouse and coming out from that powerhouse. So first you make a grip at the hips. It's not a clench. It's an ability to make rotational dynamic. Right? And to the extent that you go deeper into that grip, the outside of the grip comes away, which is eccentric as you go toward the middle and at your hips. As you go into your core, you get longer from that. When you get involved in two endpoints and create rotation between them, the true point of eccentricity happens in the middle between the two axes. In math and physics, when a curve changes direction from one point, when a curve changes from one direction to the other, that's called an inflection point. And so in the body, between axes, the true point of eccentricity is the inflection point. So anybody that comes to Pilates with a huge science background and they're big in their minds and they know a lot of science, if you can connect with them, the inflection point in the body between axes of rotation, they've studied and heard those words. They're familiar with a significance in that place called an inflection point. And there's an inflection point between the shoulders and the ears. And it's from the oppositional rotation that you get this lengthening, the famous decompression of the spinal column, of the trunk, of what connects any 2 points that's creating tension to pull them apart. So you can just say stand up straight, and you can be trying to stand up straight as much as you want. But from my view, the human body is this water balloon that consists of exotic musculature and structure in skeleton, right? And everything else that goes into it that creates a very sophisticated capacity in the human body to engage itself. First and foremost, in the ability to control rotation, to establish rotation, and then to control that rotation. The body at ease with no muscles engaged has no rotational dynamic in it. But from trying to run away from the dinosaur and survive in the jungle of gravity, right? We engage our muscles, and what we do in the jungle of gravity, that's the physical world, that's physics. And so Pilates is a routine, a conditioning routine that's based on the nature of the physical world we're in, that we live in, to facilitate the movement of our body through space for survival and for joy and to eat, to get to the food and procreate, all of that stuff where movement is essential for not only survival of the individual, but for survival of the species. So, uniform eccentric loading. We're on the definition, and we're going through the definition word for word. Well, where does loading come from? Why does loading have to be part of the ideal? It's because when you just look at the choreography, meaning the order of the exercises, by loading I mean weight bearing. I mean taking on weight, taking on the load of the body. And as you go through the sequence of the mat exercises, you see loading obviously occurring, where you do something one leg at a time before two legs at a time, because it's lighter to do one leg at a time before two legs at a time. And then I'll skip flowing through it because I like to end with those two connector words to connect the first half of the definition of the ideal with the second half of the definition of the ideal. And the second half is flowing through progressive patterns of movement. Well, we said you have to press the flow to find the fusion, right? Oh, I'm not living up to what I said I was going to do. Progressive patterns of movement is a third of the definition of the ideal. And by progressive, I mean like stairs, like a progression that goes from one place to another. And when you look at the patterns of movement that you see in all of Joe's work and in the mat, you see flexion, extension, side bending, rotation, and then torsion, where you get oppositional rotation on one axis. So see, torsion is different than core new tension, because torsion happens along one axis, and core new tension requires two. Oppositional rotation between two axes is the definition of core new tension. And when you apply core new tension across, say, the 6 axes of the body, you're distributing that tension throughout the body's capability of making endpoints of tension. And I'm sure you can come up with, well, the body rotates here, or the body does this, or you're not thinking about the longitudinal axis of the spine. But all of that's there. All I care about for you to understand MMP and core new tension are the endpoints that you see in my trademark. Because those are the ones I deal with as a Pilates instructor all the time. All right, so progressive patterns of movement, flexion, extension, side bending, rotation, and torsion. Now, progressive patterns of movement is one thing. There's also progression. There's progression in a lot of ways. There's progression in the way you breathe. There's progression in how you engage your body and move away from center and towards center. And especially when you engage in springs or rubber bands or metal tensiles, like the magic circle, all of the, not all of the, but some of the accoutrements to a Pilates workout that you employ, like a reformer, there's a progression to how you engage in tension, right? So progression is a really important part of the definition of the ideal, not just because of the patterns, but because of the way you engage in tension. And I'll leave that as the one that I wanted to mention there. Progressive patterns of movement. And then the middle part of the idea, so the definition is uniform eccentric loading, flowing through progressive patterns of movement. What makes the flowing through, and again, you can find all of my sign language on my website, hermit.com. But I'm getting to the point where I think I might close down hermit.com and sell the domain. So if you're interested in all the information that's on the website, it would be a good idea to get what you want off of it while you can. And that left me to where? Flowing through. You have to press the flow to find the fusion. And the fusion, what fusion are you after? The fusion, the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Now, for the life of me, I don't know why there isn't more receptivity or interest in understanding Pilates for what it is, for the ideal within it, if for no other reason, because MMP explains why. It explains why Pilates is what it is. And as much as that's an infringement upon you to make it whatever you want, as the tsunami of Pilates passion sweeps the globe, it forces everyone to seek higher ground to understand things better and to especially achieve distinction between me and everybody else that's teaching. And you can say, well, you're certified in this method and that method and this method, and you have this modality background or that modality background or that modality background, and all of these tangential influences on your ability as a teacher. But there's nothing more important to me when you want to really understand something than understanding why it is what it is. And so in going around the carousel and explaining MMP, it's a huge selling point or a distinction of MMP, that MMP explains why Pilates is what it is. It explains what your target is. It explains how you hit it. So it not only makes sense, that's why Michael Miller Pilates makes sense as a saying mark, it makes sense between your ears, and it makes sense in your sensation. At one point I thought that MMP and core nutention, would just be ubiquitous, which means everywhere. People everywhere would be aware of it and know that there's the bedrock of whatever else Pilates is expressed as. But I've come to a more realistic viewpoint, and just looking at human nature throughout history shows that there will always be a distribution curve of awareness and understanding and interest and profession, and where I've been blessed is that, for one, I get to talk to you live about this, and the other is that I've gotten to embrace my passion and explore my passion and share that passion with you. And there are a lot of people I've gotten to do that with, and many of them are spread out all over the world. So you may be a small contingent, or you may be a member of a small brand of Pilates. It's a brand, and that brand associates with it, whatever comes with it, right? And long after I'm dead and my character ceases to be a means of manipulating someone's impression of MMP and core nutention, they will stand in their own right, right? And you'll use them, your understanding of MMP and core nutention, to survive as a Pilates instructor. So thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. I know it's repetitious. I didn't have much to say about anything specific today, but I took a tour around the carousel with you, for you, not only to help sink in for you the familiarity of what MMP and CT stands for, right? But then to lay the example for how you can go about helping someone own, in their own right, their own understanding, and their own sensation, MMP, right? And use my words. Not so. Is there vanity there? Well, maybe, and yes, and how unavoidable is that? But I'm not saying use my words out of vanity. I'm saying use my words because they're a lifetime's worth of professing an idea, and these are the best words that I've come up with to enlighten or to illuminate the ideal. Okay? So just remember that MMP is about Joe. It's Joe's idea, it's Joe's method, it's Joe's infinitely extensible method, meaning you can make of it whatever you want, you can turn it into whatever you want. It has become 10,000 different things by 10,000 different brands. Right? Within this one brand called MMP, it uniquely takes its authority from Joe's original work on the belief that there's an ideal within that original work. And I hope that that proves to be useful for you in your effort to survive as a Pilates instructor. Because life doesn't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain, add two and two, think for yourself, or direct your thinking, and Geist.